Hello. So, my name is Jason Nowell. I am the course developer for this course. So in this video, I'm going to sort of outline the general structure of the course and generally how it's sort of designed to run. It's sort of important to note here, though, that I'm the developer, not necessarily the instructor of record at the time that you're taking this class. So what that means is that you will see me a lot, probably for most, maybe even all of the instructional videos and example videos and stuff that you're taking as you sort of progress through the class. But if you have questions about the class, you want to make sure that you contact your actual instructor because that might not be me. So in order to figure that out, you want to check your schedule or Canvas and message whomever is the actual person who is running the course, as they're the sort of person that would be in charge of all that stuff. Okay, so about the course. So the course is designed sort of naturally to be an asynchronous format. And what that means is that all of the lectures and information, all of the stuff is more or less provided online immediately. What I mean by that is that some of the content, although sort of theoretically immediately available, requires you to finish other parts of the course first, but there's no sort of limitation in terms of dates as to when you can get these. So it's not like you can only access the lectures after this certain day or before this certain day or any of that stuff. All of the date stuff, with a couple exceptions, which we'll talk about, will sort of not be a problem. They're all sort of ready up front. Now, sort of one of the exceptions to this are the exams themselves. So the exams are scheduled on the same day for everybody. So everyone will take, exam one or whatever on the same day. So this means that sort of as we go through the content, you want to think of the content of the course as sort of being broken into several chunks, where those chunks sort of each build up to the relevant exam on that piece. And that exam is happening sort of at the end of that part. So the idea here then is that we have sort of the suggested due dates and hard due dates. So suggested due dates are sort of a suggested timeline that sort of matches up if you were to sort of spread this stuff out equally throughout the entire sort of period of time prior to that exam. But the hard due dates are going to happen sort of closer to the exam time, and they're like the very end time at which you can do it. So the suggested date, which again, depending on how the course is set up within the like Canvas or whatever system, those suggested dates might be shown as due dates, but you have until the hard due date in order to actually do the content with no penalty. So even though it might be sort of flagged as late potentially if you do it after the suggested date, it won't actually be sort of penalized in any way until you get to the hard due date. And after the hard due date, there might be penalties, or you may not be able to do whatever the content is at all for credit. So to this end, there will also be a recommended progression sort of table or reference for you to see how to break it apart, again, if you were to do this sort of evenly throughout the period of time. But the whole point of an asynchronous format is that you can take the course at your own pace. So what this means is that we have this sort of recommended sort of Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or something similar for each week, what content you might want to do. But people have different schedules, and maybe you can't do it sort of on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So you could do it on different days or do, multiple days worth of work at the same time, do all of your work Monday or something like this. And sort of that's left up to you. So although it's a suggested timeline, it's not something that you have to sort of strictly adhere to. That being said, it is definitely a good idea to try to sort of stay up to date, at least on a weekly basis, because if you get sort of more than a week behind, it's really easy for that to snowball on you and sort of not be able to catch up in time. And again, I want to stress that there are hard due dates. You want to make sure that you're sort of up to date before those hard due dates arrive, usually right around the time the exams are, so that you're ready to take the exam and you have everything done in time. So it might be a system, for example, where you have sort of 6 weeks to get everything done before the first exam, or to pick a number out of a hat. Again, you should check your actual schedule. But that means that sort of you could do that 6 weeks worth of work anytime within that period, but it is highly recommended, right, that you do it at least on the weekly basis, if not sort of adhering as closely as you can to that suggested schedule. All right, so how's all this stuff presented? Well, we use this OER design, Open Education Resources, and in particular, all the course content is going to be provided through Kronos. So that's where you're going to find the lecture videos, that's where you're going to find the homework, that's where you're going to find the practice. Basically everything but possibly exams and quizzes you will find in Kronos. The course then is sort of broken into several pieces, several modules, those chunks that I was talking about, and each of those has its own separate sort of Kronos sequence that you work through. Again, it's sort of important to know you can always go back and look at the previous Kronos content. Whether or not you can get credit on it sort of depends on your instructor, but you can always go back and visit it. So you should be able to sort of review stuff if you aren't sure how it's working. Along those lines, it's also worth mentioning that the whole idea here for the content is that it's sort of available at your own pace. You can work through it. And since it's all through Kronos, we have sort of a separate video that sort of introduces Kronos and shows you how it works sort of specifically. So you definitely want to go through that video as well to make sure that it's configured properly and understand all of the features. All right. So one of the other big things for this sort of overall course design, especially in terms of how the lectures and things are sort of designed, is this approach called contextual-based learning. So there's several sort of prongs that we try to use to sort of get the idea across. So the first one is a geometric viewpoint. So essentially we want to sort of give you a visual interpretation of whatever new idea we're talking about, not necessarily as something to sort of make rigorous or have as, you know, a deliberate like exam question thing, but to give you an idea of what's happening, to give you an intuition of what that new idea is trying to accomplish. And this sort of segues nicely into the analytic viewpoint, which is sort of the more traditional math part that you're probably used to. So that's all the algebra and arithmetic and modeling of whatever the new idea is, which allows you to get sort of very precise answers and abstract it out of sort of the context of the specific thing you're trying to do. Again, this all depends on the specific idea, but generally overall, the idea is that we want you to have sort of a visualization of what's happening as a way to lead into all of the algebra and arithmetic that you're sort of used to seeing. And finally, we want to apply context. So wherever possible, which is most of the time, we want to sort of demonstrate these ideas in actual real world sort of applications, show how these things come up so they're not just sort of abstract math ideas, but that they actually represent something that you are actually sort of familiar with. And the idea here is that sort of the way humans remember things tends to be contextually. Like we're much better at remembering things when it sort of weaves into information that we're already aware of, rather than trying to remember something that is sort of standing alone, abstract of anything else that you know anything about. So the idea is we want to sort of try to get this information into something that you're already familiar with so that it's easier to sort of hold on to. So along those lines, the whole idea here, the whole goal is that we want to promote understanding rather than memorizing. And this is one of those things that is often hard for people to sort of make that distinction or know when they have sort of accomplished one rather than the other. And so a good sort of analogy here, believe it or not, is bagels. So if I were to ask you, define to me what is a bagel, chances are you could do that, right? You'd be like, okay, well, I picture it, I think about it, I'm like, okay, it's this sort of weird cylinder-y thing, but with a hole in the middle, or a torus if you're a math person. But you can describe the shape and maybe what it's like. It's a food, right? It's sort of soft with a hard exterior and all of these things. And you could sort of describe it in a way that I would be able to understand what it actually is, right? And I wouldn't confuse it with bread or with a teapot or something, right? It would be its own thing and I could understand you. But nonetheless, if you looked up in the dictionary what the definition of a bagel is, that definition will have no bearing whatsoever, right? It'll be not at all similar to what the definition you gave me, right? And the reason for that is that you didn't sort of look up in the dictionary, look up bagel, memorize that, and then try to parrot back to me that definition, right? You thought of it and you're like, okay, well, what is a bagel? Okay, I can think of what a bagel is. Now I'm going to describe it in a way that you can understand what a bagel is. That's the difference between understanding versus memorizing. So the goal here is that the stuff in this course is stuff that you will understand, meaning that you won't even necessarily be able to sort of parrot back the exact definition of what we're talking about. The goal is that you could talk about it in a way that you could describe it and somebody else would understand what it is, because that is where your sort of benchmark for understanding is, rather than just being able to sort of give me exactly the words I gave you back to me, which is more of a memorizing benchmark. All right. So that's the whole sort of way that the course is designed. We have the geometric idea, we have the analytic idea, the contextual-based learning, all of this through Chronos. And the hope is that by using these sort of multi-pronged approach, we're going to achieve understanding rather than memorizing. Okay, so that is that.